The smoke came first, then the heat, then a long tearing groan metal, separating from itself the way a tree splits before it falls. Callum Drexler moved through it without thinking. He found her wedged between two collapsed seats, unconscious, fingers still locked around a leather briefcase. He pulled her free in a single motion, spine neutral. Weight transferred and carried her across the burning grass. He set her down in the clover, turned, and went back in. He didn't know her name. She didn't know she was still alive. And in his jacket pocket, folded soft from repeated handling, was the second foreclosure notice from Falk County Savings Bank. 3 days after the crash at Harwick-Falk Regional, Callum was back on the morning shift. The burn on his left forearm stretched from his wrist to just below the elbow, wrapped in gauze that was already fraying at one edge. His supervisor, a heavy-set man named Carl, who had worked the line for 22 years, glanced at it once and didn't ask. Nobody asked. That was one of the things Callum had always liked about the job. He ran inspection checks on a regional turboprop that had come in overnight for a hydraulic line replacement. The work was precise and unhurried. When a younger mechanic named Trey mentioned that 2 of the guys from the crash were going on the Pittsburgh News that evening, Callum handed him a wrench and told him to check the clamp on the return line. "Weren't you out there?" Trey asked. "Hand me the torque spec sheet." That evening, Callum made dinner. Chicken thighs roasted with the last of the garlic from the garden. His daughter Petra sat at the kitchen table doing homework, her sneakers not quite reaching the floor. They ate without the television on. It had been like that since Dana died 4 years ago. Not a rule, just the way things had settled. Owen's dad was on Channel 11, Petra said. She was 9, and she said most things plainly, without preamble. He said he helped carry people out. Callum cut a piece of chicken. Good for him. "Were you there?" "I was nearby." Petra looked at the bandage on his arm. It was a long look, the kind she had started giving things in the last year, slow and thorough, like she was filing it for later. She picked up her fork and didn't ask anything else. The third notice from Falk County Savings arrived the following morning. It was under the door when Callum came downstairs at 5:15, before the coffee maker had finished its first cycle. He read it under the range light, Dennis Holt's signature at the bottom, same as the first 2. 31 days. He folded it in thirds, crease pressed flat, and put it in the kitchen drawer with the others. He had already been to the Community Legal Aid office on 2nd Street. A young woman named Claire, finishing her 3rd year at Pitt Law, had spent an hour going through the loan documents with him. The bank was invoking a force acceleration clause, buried in the original mortgage agreement, technically permitted under the terms, she said, but ambiguously written and possibly challengeable. She was careful with possibly. To file a proper challenge, he would need a private attorney. The retainer alone would run $12,000. She gave him a list of legal aid organizations in Allegheny County, and he thanked her and drove home. That same afternoon, 4 hours south of him at UPMC Presbyterian, a nurse named Abigail came into room 314 and found her patient awake, sitting upright against the pillow, staring at the ceiling with the expression of someone doing arithmetic. Marin Solis had broken her right arm in 2 places and fractured her left clavicle. A laceration along her cheekbone had taken 11 stitches. She had been unconscious for nearly 20 hours. "You have some messages," Abigail said, setting a cup of water on the tray. "Your assistant called 4 times, and, was there a man?" Marin said. Her voice was rough from the oxygen tube. "Big, dark hair. No vest, no jacket. He pulled me out." Abigail looked at the chart, then back up. "We don't have anyone matching that description. Most of the people who helped were first responders. He wasn't a first responder." Marin looked at the ceiling. "What was his name?" "I'm sorry, I don't." Find out. Rhea Ng had been Marin's chief of staff for 12 years, which meant she had seen Marin at her worst and learned to bring complete information on the first pass. When she called the following morning, she had already contacted the NTSB field office, the airport authority at Harwick-Falk, and 2 people she knew at the FBI's Pittsburgh field office. "The witness list doesn't match," Rhea said. 12 names confirmed by NTSB and law enforcement. None of them fit your description. No vest, no airport ID, not part of any official response team. Then, he was a civilian, which means he either left before anyone took names, or he specifically didn't give one. A pause. I pulled the HFK security camera footage. There's a clear frame at 5:47 showing a male subject carrying a woman from the wreckage. Medium build. Darker complexion. Airport issue work shirt. Badge visible. Marin was quiet. His name is Callum Drexler. He's a maintenance technician at HFK. Been there 3 years. Ria's voice shifted slightly, the way it did when she was getting to the part that mattered, before that Boeing defense. Senior structural engineer. He held the primary position on their emergency egress systems team for 8 years. Marin didn't say anything. Marin. The patent on the secondary door release mechanism used in roughly 34% of commercial aircraft currently flying in the United States patent number US 9847221. He's the lead inventor. He filed it in 2017. Another pause. He left Boeing in 2020. No termination, no disclosed reason, no press. He's been at HFK since 2021. Current salary, approximately $52,000 a year. Outside the hospital window, Pittsburgh was raining. The glass was streaked in gray, and the buildings across the river had gone soft at the edges the way they did in November. Ria was still talking. Marin held the phone against her ear, but she had stopped listening to the words. She was thinking about the specific way she had been moved through the smoke, the angle of it, the speed, the fact that she had a bruised sternum and 2 broken arm bones, but her cervical spine had come back completely clear on imaging. She had asked the orthopedic resident about that on the second day. He had said she was lucky. She hadn't argued with him. The man who had pulled her out of a burning aircraft had spent 8 years designing the exact mechanism that governs how those doors open under stress. He knew how bodies move through confined spaces under load. He had not been lucky. He had known exactly what he was doing. "Send me the full file," Marin said. She hung up and looked at the rain for a while. 30 miles away, in a house on Ridgeline Road that sat on a 1/4 acre of hillside land above the Monongahela Valley, Callum pulled a cardboard tube from beneath his bed and unrolled the drawings inside on the floor. He had done the renovation himself the year after Dana died, worked weekends for 11 months, took vacation days he'd been saving for something else. The house was modest, 1,200 square feet, but the bones were good, and he had made the most of them. Along the bottom margin of the living room elevation, in his own handwriting, he had written, "Petra's room south window for morning light." He put the drawings back in the tube. He put the tube under the bed. He lay on top of the covers for a while without sleeping, and he didn't think about the woman he had carried, because he had assumed she hadn't made it, and there was nothing useful in thinking about things that couldn't be changed. What he didn't know, what no one had told him, was that she was awake in a hospital 60 minutes south of him, reading a file with his name on it. Marin left the hospital on the 11th day. Her right arm was in a fiberglass cast from wrist to mid-bicep. The laceration on her cheekbone had begun to close into a thin line, and she moved with the careful economy of someone managing pain they had decided not to mention. Rhea was waiting at the discharge entrance, engine running, coffee ready in the cup holder. She had already loaded Marin's bag. "O'Hare is clear," Rhea said, pulling out. "Your 2 o'clock can push to Thursday. Take the interstate north." Rhea drove 3 blocks before she answered. Harwick. It wasn't a question. Harwick was 34 miles northwest of Pittsburgh, a town of 22,000 wedged between the hills and the river. Ridgeline Road climbed the eastern edge, and the houses got farther apart the higher you went. Callum was replacing a section of split-rail fence at the back of his property when the car pulled up. He heard the engine and straightened, one hand on the post. When he turned, he saw a dark sedan he didn't recognize, and a woman stepping out of the passenger side. He had never seen her face. He didn't recognize her now. She was pale, not her natural color, he understood, but the specific pallor of someone recently out of a hospital. Her wool coat was too good for this part of Pennsylvania, and she carried her right arm slightly away from her body, the way people do when they're trying not to jostle a cast. She crossed the gravel drive and stopped at the gate. "My name is Marin Solis," she said. "You're the person who pulled me out of that aircraft." Not a question. Callum set down the post driver. "I thought you didn't make it," he said. "I did." She looked at him directly. "I wanted to know what you needed." He studied her. "Nothing. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." She glanced past him at the house. He saw her eyes catch the paper taped to the front door, the notice he'd meant to take down 3 days ago. At this distance she couldn't read it, but she could see the bank's logo at the top. She didn't say anything about it. A sound came from around the side of the house. Petra appeared carrying a piece of scrap pine and a folded pocket knife. She looked at the woman at the gate without alarm. "You broke your arm," Petra said. "Yes," Marin said. "My dad got burned, but he didn't go to the hospital." She said it factually, without accusation, and glanced at Callum with the mild expression of someone noting a thing long established. Callum looked at his daughter with the patience of a man who has given up winning certain arguments. Something crossed Marin's face, not quite a smile, but the beginning of one. Callum told her she didn't owe him anything. He said it plainly and without resentment, and then he stepped inside and let the screen door close between them. Marin stood at the gate. Through the mesh, she could see the notice on the front door, could see the number in the amount box and the date below it. She stood there long enough that Rhea got out of the car and waited beside her, which was a thing Rhea also knew how to do. Back in Chicago, Marin did not go to the office. She asked Rhea to forward the Falk County Savings Bank filings to her personal laptop. She ordered food she didn't eat and read documents until midnight. "What are you doing?" Rhea asked on the phone. "Somewhere past 10 o'clock. Reading a financial statement." Modern. Silence. "The acceleration clause," Marin said. "The bank's used it 14 times in the last 18 months. All of them are on Ridgeline Road, or within 2 blocks of it." She scrolled to the next page. "Falk County Savings has $340 million in assets. They're profitable in the traditional deposit business, but they're overextended on commercial real estate. There's a development group out of Pittsburgh, Halverson Property Partners, that's had preliminary conversations with the town council about a commercial corridor along the Upper East Side." "I'm going to ask you again," Rhea said. "You already know." Rhea said nothing for a moment. "He saved your life. That has nothing to do with this." Rhea said nothing to that either, which meant she disagreed but had decided not to press it. On the same afternoon, 300 miles northeast in Harwick, Callum had sat across a desk from Dennis Holt for 22 minutes. Dennis Holt was 58 years old and had run the Falk County branch for 9 years. He was a man who had learned to deliver bad news in the tone of a favor, and he delivered it now with the practiced warmth of someone who believes that presentation can substitute for content. The restructuring option, he explained, was straightforward. Callum could sign a voluntary sale agreement at below market value currently assessed at 23% under recent comps. This would satisfy the outstanding loan balance and close the account. The bank would handle the rest. Dennis smiled when he said it. Callum sat very still. He listened to all of it. Then he thanked Dennis for his time and stood up. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for 11 minutes. Through the windshield he could see the brick face of the bank building, the logo above the entrance, the customer service number printed in gold beneath it. The building had been there since 1963. His father had opened a savings account there when Callum was 7, standing at the same counter. That account was closed now. He looked at his phone. He had written Marin Solis's number on the back of a gas receipt and tucked it in the center console the day she left. He took it out now and looked at it for a while. Then he put it back. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. The number was Chicago. He answered after the 4th ring. "Do you have legal representation?" she said. "That's not your concern. Pennsylvania Banking Code, Section 7-106. Her voice was even, like she was reading from a page she had already committed to memory. "The acceleration provision in your original mortgage agreement is enforceable only if the triggering event meets 2 conditions, both of which require a specific written default classification. The bank hasn't filed that classification." They skipped the step. 4 seconds passed. "How do you know that?" he said. The line went quiet. Then it clicked off. The second time Marin came to Harwick, she didn't call ahead. She drove herself, her left hand on the wheel, cast arm resting in her lap, and she parked on the street in front of the house at 7:20 on a Tuesday evening in November. Through the front window, she could see 2 people at the kitchen table. Callum was leaning over something, pointing. Petra was beside him, chin in her hand, following his finger with her eyes. Blueprint paper. Marin saw when she got closer a technical drawing laid flat under the kitchen light, covered in dimensions and reference marks. She knocked. Callum came to the door and looked at her with the mild expression of someone who is not surprised, but has not decided yet whether to say so. He opened the door wider and stepped back. He sent Petra upstairs with the easy authority of someone who doesn't need to negotiate it. Petra went, but not before giving Marin a look that was neither suspicious nor particularly curious, more the look of someone who already has a theory. Marin spread the documents on the kitchen table. The bank filings, the title records, the parcel maps for Ridgeline Road and the two adjacent streets. Callum stood across from her and read them without touching them, his eyes moving across the pages in the way that engineers read complex documents, looking for the load-bearing part first. He straightened up. "They want the land," he said, "not the money." "Yes, the money is a mechanism." He looked at the parcel map. "Same thing with the clause, it's not enforcement, it's pressure. They're not trying to collect, they're trying to make people leave. 14 households in 22 months, all on the same corridor." He looked at her. "You came here to tell me something I already knew. I came here to ask whether you want me to buy the bank." He was quiet for a long moment. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark valley. The river wasn't visible from here, but on clear nights you could see the lights of the paper mill reflected in it, and tonight was clear. "I don't want to be rescued like that," he said. "This isn't about you." She said it cleanly, without particular edge. The silence that followed lasted long enough for both of them to understand that what she'd said was not entirely true, that she knew it wasn't, that he knew it wasn't, and that neither of them was going to say so. He told her she should go before Petra came back downstairs for dinner. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He said it the way people say things when they need time they're not going to admit to needing. Marin gathered the papers. One page slid from the pile and went flat on the floor. Callum bent and picked it up in the same motion she did, and he handed it back, and their fingers did not touch, but the distance between them was less than it had been at any point in the conversation. She walked to her car. She sat in it without starting the engine. Her phone lit up on the passenger seat. "The valuation board finished today," Rhea said. "Falk County Savings is acquirable within 60 days, under a standard bank purchase agreement. Clean balance sheet on the consumer side. The commercial real estate exposure is manageable." Marin watched the lights in the upstairs window of the house. She thought she could see the shadow of Petra moving behind the curtain. "Move faster," she said. Rhea Eng had worked for Marin long enough to know the difference between a business decision and something else. She had held that knowledge quietly across 4 cities and 3 real estate cycles, and she had learned that the most useful thing she could do in moments like this one was bring the complete picture and then wait. She set a manila folder on the conference table in the corner office on a Monday morning in mid-November and did not sit down. "This isn't about the acquisition," she said. Marin looked up from her laptop. "Then what?" "NTSB released a preliminary findings summary last Friday." Rhea placed one hand on the folder. "I need you to read it." Marin pulled the folder across the table and opened it. She read without expression, the way she always read, quickly, scanning for structure before she went back for detail. Then she went back for detail. The preliminary findings cited mechanical failure of a secondary egress door hinge bracket, consistent with metal fatigue accelerated by improper maintenance sequencing. The airline had received an acknowledged maintenance bulletin BM2019-447, which outlined the correct inspection intervals for secondary hinge brackets on that aircraft series. The bulletin had not been incorporated into the airline's maintenance protocol. It had been acknowledged and filed. The bulletin had 2 authors. One was a Boeing technical writer. The other was a senior structural engineer from the Defense Division, whose name appeared on 8 related technical documents between 2017 and 2020, Callum Drexler. He had co-written the specific maintenance guideline that, if followed, would have prevented the failure that had killed 3 people and put Marin in a hospital for 11 days. Rhea set a second document beside the first. It was an internal Boeing memorandum dated March of 2020. It documented a formal internal objection filed by a senior engineer requesting that Bulletin BM2019-447 be reclassified from advisory to mandatory. The objection had been reviewed by 2 vice presidents and declined, citing commercial relationships with 4 major airline partners who had lobbied against mandatory compliance timelines. The engineer who filed the objection had resigned 2 weeks after the decision was issued. His name was on the document. Marin sat very still. She looked at the 2 pages for a long time without saying anything. Outside the office windows, Chicago was moving through its November paces, the lake wind pushing the trees along the boulevard in long, continuous rolls. He could file suit, Rhea said. Against Boeing. Against the airline. The liability exposure on those companies is significant. Whatever he'd recover, he knows, Marin said. Most likely, he's known the whole time. She looked at the documents again. then at the window, and he chose not to. Rhea picked up the folder and held it for a moment before setting it down again. She walked to the door and stopped there. Marin. She said the name the way she sometimes did, not as an address, but as a full statement. When you buy that bank, make sure it's for the right reason. She left. Marin didn't answer because she was still looking at the window, and because she didn't have an answer she could give honestly. That night at Harwick Falk Regional, Callum Drexler completed his inspection of a Bombardier Q400 that had come in for a scheduled 2,400-hour check. He worked through the checklist in order, as he always did. When he reached the secondary door mechanism, he paused. His hand went to the hinge bracket assembly, the specific point that the bulletin had identified, the specific geometry he had spent 14 months analyzing. He ran his thumb along the underside of the bracket, feeling for the wear pattern. He checked each fastener in sequence. He noted the torque reading. He moved on. The hangar was quiet, except for the sound of the heating system kicking against the November cold. He worked without hurrying, as though the quality of his attention to this particular task was the only thing in the world that was still entirely up to him. Dennis Holt heard about the outside investor through his contact on the town council, a man named Ray who sat on the Economic Development Subcommittee and had, over the years, developed a reliable sense of when to make a phone call. Ray didn't know the investor's name or origin, only that queries had been made to the Regional Banking Authority about acquisition eligibility and that the timeline appeared serious. Dennis Holt moved on a Wednesday. He pulled the emergency acceleration provision on 6 accounts simultaneously, including Callum Drexler's, reducing the notice period from 31 days to 14. It was within the letter of the original loan agreement. Technically, if you read the emergency provision in isolation, and did not look at the restructuring terms he had proposed in writing 3 weeks earlier, which constituted a binding modification. The paperwork arrived at the Ridgeline Roadhouse on a Monday morning. Callum read it at the kitchen table before Petra came downstairs, the same way he had read all the others. He folded it in thirds. He sat for a moment, then he got in the truck. He drove to the bank and parked in the lot and walked inside. He did not have an appointment. He walked past the teller windows to the manager's office in the back and opened the door without knocking. Dennis Holt was on the phone. He looked up and held up one finger. Callum stood in front of the desk and waited. Dennis finished his call and set the phone down with the expression of a man who intends to control the tone of whatever comes next. Callum placed 2 pieces of paper on the desk. The new acceleration notice on the left, the written restructuring proposal Dennis had sent 2 months ago on the right. You violated your own terms, Callum said. Dennis looked at the papers without touching them. Loan agreements have provisions for the restructuring proposal is a binding modification under Pennsylvania contract law. You know that. Callum's voice was entirely level. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here so there's a record of this conversation. Dennis pressed a button on his desk phone and asked for Greg from building security. Callum didn't move. He looked at Dennis Holt with the patience of someone who has had this kind of conversation before, in different buildings, with different men who had the same expression. He waited until Greg appeared in the doorway. Then he stood up straight. You know what's funny? He said. I don't need that house. I need Petra to have a place to live. He paused one beat. Those are different things. He left. Dennis watched him go, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who has heard something he should probably think about more carefully. Callum sat in the truck. He looked at his phone for a moment. Then he dialed. She answered on the second ring. What are you doing with the bank? He said. Buying it. Why? 3 seconds of silence. The kind where a person isn't choosing their words but deciding how much of the truth to put into them. Because it's wrong, she said. That's not the only reason. She didn't say anything. She didn't deny it. He looked out the windshield at the parking lot, at the brick face of the bank building, at the sign above the entrance that had the name and the logo and the phone number for customer service. That afternoon, Petra came home from school at 3:15. She dropped her backpack inside the door and went looking for her father. She found him sitting on the front porch steps, forearms on his knees, looking at the road. She sat down beside him without saying anything. Her hand found his forearm, over the place where the gauze had been, the skin still slightly pink underneath where it had healed. She didn't say anything about it. Neither did he. They sat there while the light shifted and the valley went amber and then blue. Solace Capital completed the acquisition of Falk County Savings Bank in 19 days. The regional banking authority had never processed a purchase agreement that quickly, and Ria Ng had slept approximately 4 hours a night for the final 2 weeks of it. She organized a brief press availability in Pittsburgh on the morning of the signing, which Maren did not attend. Maren was in Harwick. She drove herself again, the cast already removed after the bone healed clean, a 3-inch scar along her right forearm the only evidence of the break that remained. She got to HFK at 7:45 in the morning, when Callum's shift started. The sky was the specific white of a Pennsylvania December, the kind that looks like snow but hasn't decided yet. She waited near the side entrance by the maintenance bay. He came out at 8 to 10, carrying a coffee thermos and a clipboard. He saw her and stopped. She held out an envelope. He took it without opening it. "It's not a check," she said. "It's not the mortgage papers." He looked at her. "Bulletin BM 2019-447, she said. "I forwarded a formal request to the NTSB asking them to investigate whether the airline and Boeing had an obligation to make compliance mandatory and what their liability exposure is. I CC'd the Department of Transportation and 2 members of the Senate Commerce Committee who have been tracking aviation maintenance issues." His face didn't change. The wind off the tarmac moved between them. "I didn't ask your permission," she said. "I'm telling you because I thought you should know. You didn't have to do that." "I know." He held the envelope at his side. He looked at her, actually looked at her, the way he hadn't in the parking lot, or the kitchen, or the airport lounge. He saw the scar along her cheekbone, thin now, following the line of the bone. He saw that she was holding herself straight in the cold wind, with the particular discipline of someone who has been in enough difficult rooms to know that posture matters. "You should hear from the NTSB within 60 days, she said. "You'll want a lawyer for the conversation." He nodded once. She started to turn. He spoke. "You didn't ask me if I wanted you to." "No," she said. "I didn't." The new management of Falk County Savings, in its first week of operation, commissioned an internal review of all outstanding loan agreements carrying acceleration clauses. Ria had designed the policy as a portfolio-wide corrective measure, applied to all 14 affected accounts simultaneously, without exception, and without reference to any individual borrower by name. Callum Drexler's mortgage was the first restructuring confirmed under the new terms. He didn't say thank you. He nodded, and he turned back to the aircraft he had been checking, and Maren watched him for a moment before she walked back across the tarmac to the car. The wind was steady and cold. The white sky held. That afternoon, at 4:37, Maren's phone rang. She was sitting in the rental car on the highway shoulder outside Harwick, waiting for the GPS to recalculate a turn she'd missed. The number was a 9724 area code she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she said. "It's Petra." A pause. "Petra Drexler. I saw your name on the news. They said you bought the bank." Another pause, shorter. "I just wanted to say thank you." Maren sat in the car for a moment. The GPS was still recalculating. Outside, a farm truck went by on the county road, going slow. "Okay," Maren said finally. It wasn't the right word, but it was the only one that came. "Okay." 3 weeks after the acquisition closed, Dennis Holt submitted his resignation from Falk County Savings. The board accepted it without comment. The following Monday, a brief item appeared in the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, noting that the Pennsylvania State Police Financial Crimes Unit had opened a civil investigation into a pattern of foreclosure filings in western Allegheny County. Dennis Holt's name did not appear in the article. His former title did. Callum received the restructuring confirmation letter on a Thursday. He read it at the kitchen table, set it down, and got up to make coffee. Petra came downstairs at 7:15. Saw the letter, looked at her father. He was standing at the counter with his back to her. She sat down at the table and read the first 2 lines, and then she didn't read any further, because she understood the part that mattered. She didn't say anything, and neither did he, which was how they handled most of the things that were actually important. He called Maren that evening at 9. He had done it once before, from the bank parking lot, and that had been about a specific thing. This time was different, and he wasn't entirely sure what to do with that. She answered. "Your arm," he said. "How is it?" "Healing. A beat. The cast came off last week." "Good." He looked at the kitchen table. "I didn't ask about the arm." She was quiet for a moment. not the silence of someone who hadn't heard the silence of someone deciding. "I know," she said. The call lasted 22 minutes. There was no record of what was said during those 22 minutes, and no account of it would have been entirely accurate anyway, because it was the first conversation they had had that was not about the loan, not about the airline, not about a 9-year-old girl who had a theory about things. It was simply two people talking past midnight, while one of them stood at a window in Chicago, and the other sat at a kitchen table in a house he had built himself on the side of a Pennsylvania hill. Both of them knew that. Neither of them said so. Marin turned off her office monitors at 10:52. She did not note the time. She was looking at the city below the grid of it, the particular orange of the sodium lights along the lakeshore boulevards, and she was still on the phone. Later, when the call had ended and the apartment was quiet, Callum pulled the cardboard tube from beneath the bed. He unrolled the drawings on the kitchen floor under the range light, the same drawings he had looked at in fear 2 months ago. He found his pencil in the junk drawer. He looked at the living room at the south wall, at the window that was there, at the wall space to the left of it, where there could be a second window if someone were willing to pull the old framing and reset the header. He pulled the paper flat. He began to draw. April came to Ridgeline Road, the way it always came, gradually, and then suddenly, the apple tree behind the house going from bare to blossomed in what felt like a single overnight event. Petra had claimed a spot on the back porch steps where the morning light was good, and she was working on carving a bird this time, a chickadee, the detail more deliberate than anything she had attempted before, the wing feathers individually marked. Marin had come to Harwick 3 times since December. Each time there had been a reason: the bank's community lending policy, the NTSB preliminary response, the conversation with the Pitt law professor about the Boeing timeline. Each time there had been dinner at the kitchen table and a drive back to Pittsburgh in the evening. This time, there was no reason. She knocked at 2 in the afternoon. Callum opened the door with the unhurried movement of someone who had been expecting nothing particular and found something else. "You didn't call ahead," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd answer if I did." He considered this for a moment. "You never tried." He stepped back from the door. Petra looked up from her spot on the porch steps. She waved at Marin with the hand that wasn't holding the knife, the casual wave of a person greeting someone they have long since stopped needing to evaluate. She went back to her bird. Callum walked her through the house and out the back door. He hadn't done that before, brought her to this part of the property, and there was nothing he needed to show her here. No document to discuss, no timeline to review. He opened the back door, and she followed him out onto the porch, and he stood at the railing and looked out at the valley below. The Monongahela was visible from here in the afternoon light, a silver bend in the lower distance, the paper mill's stacks, tracing a slow vertical white against the hill on the far side. He didn't explain it. She didn't ask. On the weathered table beside the steps, she saw the drawings. A new set pencil on drafting paper, the living room elevation she recognized from the framed prints inside, but opened differently. A second window on the south wall where there hadn't been one, the header penciled in, the framing sketched out lightly. The pencil was still there on top of the paper. She looked at the drawing for a while. Then she looked at him. He was looking at the valley. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She looked at the screen. Ria's name. She looked at it for 2 full seconds, then turned the screen off and put the phone back in her pocket. Callum had seen. He didn't say anything. He pulled a second chair from against the wall and set it beside the table with the drawings, the legs settling evenly on the old porch boards. The back door opened. Petra came through carrying 2 mugs and a smaller one for herself, and she set the 2 larger ones on the table beside the drawings without being asked, and then settled back on the steps with her own mug and her carving knife and her bird. She didn't explain why she'd made 3. She didn't look up. Nobody asked her to sit somewhere else. Nobody needed to. The afternoon light moved across the valley in the slow, uncomplicated way of April, long and low, and without urgency. The apple tree was blossoming. The chickadee in Petra's hands was almost finished. Callum Drexler had not pulled Marin Solis from a burning aircraft because he knew who she was, and Marin Solis had not acquired a bank because she owed him a life. What happened afterward in the April light, beside an unfinished drawing and the quiet sound of a child's knife finding the shape of something small and true, had no name in any contract either of them had ever signed.